Hello again. This is a short sound test for all the translators. For the second part today, we start at 6. Thank you.
Chom den den jambe yong la cha za lo kong ge lo dim nyen den da nye da nam da rab sa ra ve chi nye dang ge chi jin zhe chi re ni je tu ga ra le bong zen kong da si be zhen ra ma re men tam du nge chi zhe ve ro zoi gong la pu je dar ze yin lai zhu ju yong de song ru dar che ro ni mo ni long le je jiao zhou ro ze jin ma re men se du nga ra nyu gu qi nie juan ze ra zhe nam de ne da jian sa ju tar sen yuan den lu zuo jia se tu gu Chödrak, Chödrak, Chöni, Jente, Dagle, Mensen, Jambe, Yong, La, Endu. Amarabazanade, 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 Zedenen che chen ra zre je da le de mo men ba ra sra ne ka don den je jong lo do pa ye lo je po be nong wa zal do so kang ge tu je zre je ta wa tham je nam mong ba tham be chue ne yer den be Kodam de la ingesa chala jayan shama durje jenre se sa yin yin bo driba nam barasar nam ke yin bo shamba gun do son yewe se chen je la ingesa chala sende bo ran ye bene cho do jeme du je chola ma gan do mo ren jen yin jen de ma Yayam Drama La Ingusha Sarvaya Shije Kala Kin Ravijin Guruje Zebe Dong Durje Ling Lapo Yerve Tenba Kune Sanzebe Kaju Rinpoche La Shaje Wu Tsarab Kundu Sije Tanyile Tamke Samye Shage Yung Song Shin Shangchum Yinpe Lamkin Karma Pa Mishe Debe Chiwe Tsuge Du Lasso Japsun Drove Sem Tang Shangchup Chodu Tu Jebe Sem Number Ni Sal Tamne Number Lenje Changme Tambe Chu Chulshindo Senro Nang.
So please listen attentively and according to the principles of the Buddha Dharma, which means that to begin with, one starts out taking refuge in the three jewels, then one generates the body-mind, and with that mindset, one listens to the explanations.
다 드레마 teaching shuya de kan leversna tanda tawakata ki sakje yin ane samba che tamche dongxin dangme ba se de shuya de.
In terms of the four seals, we'll begin the explanations of the third of the four seals. And here the Buddha said, all things are empty and do therefore not entail a self-entity.
Tandi che yung tu dorna che tamche tongpa tong dame pa tenla papan di ta nangbe lamje tsawa je cha yung se.
So to ascertain this is the very foundation of the Buddhist path or Buddhism.
Penna shersingen do nang do desuma re.
Laso?
Tamche chembe ke kompung rogona jimba chutum naso parsin yin about the chis. Oh, okay.
Tene drogona.
Drogona. Shershin maimbe parsin about the chisam jisana yang dadong tamche chembe lam rotu mare sungat.
A Prajna Paramita Sutra, that is to say, a lecture given by Buddha Shakyamuni on the topic called Higher Knowledge Gone to the Other Shore. There one can read the following, namely that Buddha Shakyamuni said that the person who intends to obtain the all-knowing state of a Buddha, if that person were to practice the first 5 of the 6 paramitas forever, he would not be able to attain Buddha, the enlightened state. That's simply not possible in the absence of deeds based in higher knowledge gone to the other shore.
Piyindu Sherab Parsin Tang Delvayina. Okay.
Sherab Parsin Tang.
And Sherab Parsin Tang Delvayina Parsin Yambatanso Kanga Tamse Chimbe She Tobjik Yurun Rogre.
Whereas generosity, ethics, and so on, the first of the 5 in this list of 6, if all of them are practiced on the basis of number 6, that is to say, higher knowledge gone to the other shore, then Buddha, the enlightened state, can be attained. Sanje
Kongkong Kapures. Ti into Perna Sanje Kongkong Sengete Jubala Taptang Sherab Nikaha Tsungobiyot.
In terms of making efforts to attain Buddha, the enlightened state, it's necessary to combine method with higher knowledge gone to the other shore.
Dandela Taptang Sengkabla Tap Nijechimbu Nyevara Tungwe Jimbatang ye Tsutim Song ye Zepa Gamye Nenzo Tsangmare.
So the main perspective as to method or methods is that of compassion, namely that one's deeds of generosity, ethics, patience, and the like are enacted on the basis of compassion, or rather because of the practitioner's compassion for all sentient beings.
Te taphinika gob junsen yang desungare.
Pachinika?
Tabhinika. Ya. Bana ta nika gob junsen yang sherap jibu yina shivel namdo kolro gre songare. Tab jibu yina korbenes kolro gre. Tinika gores.
Tab chikbu yina?
Tab jibu yina korwa gna kolro gres. Korben nan plan rogdes. Kol se de norr se gerwa.
Norr rogendo.
Norr rogendo nga koval plan rog gerwa.
Re kanrisna ningje mato shera meva chen.
Ja, jimbachatan shupo chen la de gre mato korval tortuete sherap cheperjin tinku gerwa.
The reason for the need to combine both method, and here the primary perspective is that of compassion, with higher knowledge is the following. On the basis of higher knowledge alone, one does attain the otherworldly state named nirvana, peace beyond suffering. However, on the basis of higher knowledge alone, or the result of higher knowledge alone, is that one, after that attainment, remains in that state, not acting on a vast scale for the benefit of all sentient beings who are still trapped in various worldly existences. And if a practitioner bases his efforts as to generosity and so on compassion alone, without developing higher knowledge, then the result is that of remaining in worldly existences. For example, in consequence of having enacted deeds of generosity on a vast scale, but on the basis of compassion alone, the result is rebirth in good circumstances with wealth and the like. However, these circumstances are not beyond the world, so liberation from worldly existences cannot be attained on the basis of compassion alone. So in brief, one needs to conjoin the two, as it were, compassion and higher knowledge. Now, the third seal, which is all things are empty and do therefore not entail a self-entity, aren't self-contained, as it were, or autonomous. That statement primarily concerns higher knowledge, though though as it is one of the main Buddhist instructions, as it were, it should be understood that the element of compassion, the presence of compassion, is implied.
Tininde 당간조 네 고단송 쇼운데 최 탐제세 엑직데 최 탐제기 난 가르뒤 용도도 쓰다 봉봉아 감접제 전체 주닉 거드 셰기.
Now what do the words all things or all phenomena refer to? Well, all the basic constituents of all kinds of worldly existences, such as the 5 skandhas, the 5 psychophysical constituents that make for the reality of an individual. And then you have various, one could say, more extensive categorizations of the same, such as the category known as the 18 dhatus, the category known as the 12 ayatanas. So these things within those very categories are what's referred to when speaking of all things or all phenomena.
양 가브르 최 탐체스디 최 생겐데 시당 남기뒤베 이거 청만 거래.
Sometimes the same words, all things, are explained as all things, both inner and outer.
다 최스 최식대 거랑 근접 잠도 라랑 게 신이 다고 잡든 ken게
kunchop samtu
잠도
rangrangi
신이
rangrangi tsenjera dönche nypa de la kogore.
Ja, dönche nypa.
Tsenji.
데 다고 잡든 ken게라 최 잡으라.
So what is a thing or a phenomenon? Well, the general definition of a thing, a phenomenon, is that which in the relative world performs its specific function.
대체 연대 단달라 최 탐제스도 유세 송마르와.
And all, of course, the word all is a reference to each and everything, all possible things.
단능 배용도 남래 배나 최스디 가르카르레스나 공봉아 생긴다 감접제 생긴내서 송마르.
So the word all is a reference to the various categories listed earlier, the 5 skandhas, the 18 dhatus, and so on.
다 juk 풍부가 생긴다라 족제 풍부 철배 풍부 두시제 풍부 두시배 풍부 남버제 풍부 송마르. 풍부가 돼.
Ja, du var shepata de semgi gela yuken mangpo surdune tene chudi shepa sonni shiki.
Ja, yulla bikberlo.
Yulla mikbelo va. Tene du cherva de du tsor chavala kogore.
Chaval kogore chaval.
Perna
Perna, Simjung, Deshatan to Jeroa.
Ore.
Then
Da chava tetang, chava de la tenne, jungwe drebu son de shiki.
yeah, Sim Penanderoa, so sim the Salt Samteroa. Salt Sam number T, Depen Pochela Party Dogdoa.
Du chage wong.
Yeah.
Okay. Da koran ore semgi chava chetang de.
Yeah, Sim Shawachetang.
Du shede yula mikpa sam ko
Yeah.
gre.
So,
So mikpa sam. Te nam sheda chirta mirtang nam shi
Yeah.
ye am trup kan de shik ina
yeah.
ko gre. So in the first of the categories or categorizations listed, that of the 5 skandhas, the 5 psychophysical constituents of an individual, you have form, being the first of the 5, which primarily has to do with physical form, the physical body, and so on. The second is the skandha, or constituent, as it were, of sensations, various types of sensation. The third is about the mental working of primarily the mind focusing upon one or many objects in consequence of the coming together of the synchronous meeting of various causes and conditions that make focusing upon one or many objects possible. Then we have number 4, which primarily is about the various actions that result from various mental events. Example, you have the fundamental mind stream, on the basis of which specific mental events evolve. Example, the mental event named desire. Here, the mental event focuses upon an object, and the mind in this context is based in a sentiment of desire for the object focused upon, which triggers a certain course of action. The course of action which is colored by, or which is influenced by that mental event of desire. And then we have number 5 in this list of 5, which is about the different types of object-oriented kinds of knowledge that manifest within the minds of worldly individuals.
That teaching you Pungong Avotella, Penanituish take the Tatang to want to Chena.
Now, according to Theravada Buddhism, in specific, its branch, the Shravaka path, concerning the 5 skandhas, the 5 psychophysical constituents,
제자 니퇴 택배 동바 세용대 풍공아본데 딱히 제나 도만 뒤에 풍고지 렌도마도 직딩도 주면도 송래.
And how these are defined in terms of them being empty of a self-entity, according to the Shravaka school of thought, or the Shravaka path. Here, empty means that the five are simply a collection of the five constituents and all their sub-constituents, as it were. So there isn't a whole, as it were, with a real reality, a whole that has some sort of autonomous existence in that it's real as a whole. So, according to the Shravaka path, the five skandhas are empty of that kind of reality.
다디게라 동바 생겐테 반나 오직 제대바지 짠 죽으면도 홍보점들에도 반나 죽지 홍보 세대
칙다 양년도 에르고
인터넷 찍라고 짠 민도 도만도 홍보진들에샤.
And each of the five skandhas, if one takes the example of the first, the one of physical form, or forms, as it were, is also not a whole, meaning a solid entity of sorts. The skandha of form is made up of many, or innumerable in fact, sub-constituents, as it were. So what is at hand is simply a group of, or a collection of constituents. A whole is not at hand. The skandha of physical forms is empty of that kind of reality, and that's what empty means to practitioners of the Shravaka path. So, empty, as has been explained, points to, in terms of Theravada Buddhism, that there are, or there isn't a single thing anywhere that exists as a solid whole, as it were. It's whole making for a real reality of sorts. All things, without exception, according to Theravada Buddhism, are but collections of, or groups of, many, many constituents. So what does the absence of a self-entity mean here? It's a reference to the notion of an individual, or an individual self. in terms of these collections of many sub constituents, there isn't a self-entity within them either. Not only are they empty in terms of not being a whole, they also lack a self-entity that would make for a specific identity of sorts.
Tene, teta yonde penanga singede tongbo zupung gerze.
Dadi pena supungi gelarwa danga sejuti tanda pena bemchula yang bemchu karina yang da mepa kogograva tongshin da mepa.
Tani
de gangsagi da sonde
so sak da mepa ting pabiarwa.
However, in Theravada Buddhism, one should keep in mind the main issue in terms of no self-entity regards the individual's imagined self. There doesn't tinida bemchula sopa da pena tekchingi lugla tinida de gangsa kitame da chögita me shita de konso de michin sarva. There isn't in Theravada Buddhism a great deal of investigation into a possible self-entity within non-sentient physical form. That is to say, mountains, rivers, tables, chairs, and so on. Inanimate things. A discussion as to no self regarding inanimate things doesn't take place a lot in in Theravada Buddhism. The discussion as to no self primarily concerns the no self of the individual, the animate world, as it were, of human beings, animals, and other types of sentient beings.
Nintu take Benam Shunkin take a Dujet Metapayimba
Lasso?
Sajet Dungayimba Diki Ha Bonde that comes some Kanaki and a young Dunge Tartuna Dungachil and Rosamendo something Nepat and drinks her.
Now, practitioners of the Shravaka path, having given careful thought and contemplation and meditation regarding the first two of the four seals, namely the instructions that concerns the fact that all conditioned things are impermanent, and the instruction that concerns the fact that circumstances or things or phenomena, however one wants to phrase it, which make for falling into worldly existences are of the nature of suffering. Once this has been properly integrated, the practitioner then asks himself, well, or becomes aware of to begin with, that wherever one is born, whatever the worldly existence, whether a higher existence or a lower existence is, all of it makes for suffering.
Perna flatang li kampung top devachi in a young Nito take Perlam Shupateke. Do don't deal with Samatra which Tungior. Flatang me legit.
Now, higher rebirths, either as a god or in the world of humans, regarding humans with good circumstances or humans at large, perhaps, those rebirths, even those rebirths, I should say, are viewed as foods mixed with poison. Meaning there is a keen sense of the fact that wherever one is born, there is but suffering.
That is Zikchadu. Takun number Lote, Korwal Sawan and Dendembe, Korwan the Dungari Bangan and Dille to Tapchik Samatangi.
Thus, the practitioner ascertains and becomes sure of the fact that wherever one is born in terms of various worldly existences, there is but suffering, and the urge to escape all of these surfaces or emerges.
Tan Delejik Targodu, that Korwan the troop where Zawa can't tune to see. Then let on Yamun, Yamunica, the Conte,
and so they seek to find the primary cause for all those worldly existences. And in the course of their investigation, it becomes clear to them that the source of all of this is afflictive, obscuring states and their actions, and what those actions accrue, and that in turn, or the source of that in turn, is the notion of a real reality as to the individual.
That is nga singete, one nga singete, Yobachi rendo, nga singete, me namton norbachi rendo, that punget and the takchetang.
And so they set out in the quest of investigating the five skandhas, which make for an individual, in order to see whether the self, the individual self, has some kind of real reality, or if it perhaps is just a figment of imagination.
Tin the pen zug gel takje tang zug shila ta gongba lakba go ta re ne ne ta dad khabadu de ta te danyeg marwa.
So they in great detail look into the ins and outs of the five skandhas, the five psychophysical constituents, searching for the individual self, because if the individual self were to be real, one should be able to find it. One couldn't claim that a self which one can't put one's finger on, which one can't locate at all, exists. That's sort of a given. So in terms of their analysis, they search for the self within each individual skandha, and if we look at the physical body, for example, they try to locate the self. They go through each and every inner organ, every part of the physical body, in order to see if perhaps the self can be located somewhere within the body.
Ti takche tang tang du kabla tang nge zuk sen hemba cheva tala gopa me tenden ziki nga mevat.
And once it becomes clear that a self isn't residing anywhere within the body, that makes for a shift in the mindset of the practitioner, in that his previously very strong sense of attachment to the physical body is weakened to a great extent, because evidently the logical conclusion would be, if there isn't a self within the body, why should I bother with it that much?
Ti into ta zug pungpol chik takche tan dam evate ngepan rong savi chugute ta choru pungbu tento takche tan.
So once there is certainty with respect to that within the body there isn't an individual self, the practitioner then goes on to investigate the first of the four remaining skandhas. All of them are immaterial in that they are about various workings of the mind. So the practitioner now goes into the details and the ins and outs of the skandha of sensations, or sensation, however one wants to phrase it, in order to see whether within that skandha it's possible to locate the individual self.
Techedu ta chorbe tentu da de cheche tane pen chorwa sinkendala dewa dungal tonyam chowa samyor.
Now, in terms of different kinds of sensation, you have three basic types: sensations of well-being, sensations of suffering or painful sensations, and sensations that are neither pleasurable nor painful, sort of a neutral nature.
Ti chorwa dewa da yena ta dungal da je gwem da te chorwa dewe nang do da ti yeg marwa da singete chorwa
Ja, dat sikten så går som dråtan där kan
rotan je do da singine kasi ji yeba yena.
Ja.
Chorwa dewa tere dungal tere tonyam tere.
Det ni?
Chorwa da yena.
Ja.
That this sumkayan jurwaching chure chane ti tendo dan yeg marwa.
So in terms of sensations come and go. Sensations are not permanent. And you have three kinds of sensation, and all of them happen and then disappear. So if any of them were to be identified as the individual self in the quest or in the course of the analysis, well, that result, namely that one of them is synonymous with a real reality as to an individual self, would fall flat on its own face, because Tamangama conclusion di kare.
Sorben na la da nyeg mi do wa tene se na
Dat sena nigi mindu tene.
ja det
Da perna sorva chikti da yin trenna
ja
tene.
sorwa jin te da ten re tug marwa
Then you would end up with quite a weird situation, namely that one specific sensation is synonymous with the individual self. So then one would ask, what's the connection with the other sensations then? Since they have nothing to do with the individual self. So that's why the idea that one specific type of sensation is the idea that it would be synonymous with the individual self falls flat on its own face, as it were.
다간 아신게 되는 두시에 때도 다도 도면도 세주고요 그래.
Da tamangama da mangpo yöne da chikti
다 직산 얘기 말어.
sigmaro.
매 직변 되든 로단 되치는 얘기여와.
Mangpo yö sarve shuku tene da koran chikreva yönani.
yöna chikgogrowa.
Tene da shenta so kanchene chungre de da chikpo de la drelva koran chetu gemarva kanresena.
용 말에 내 현바점지래 마도 다 얘기 믿어 같네. ngazo detes ngazo pe시 딱서와 있는데 고대버와 인다이나 또고 갖고 유기로 와 나메세 저런 레산도 하고 선부도 와
메덴데시 슈고요 메시
제제 랍던데 와
티 캠프 송마 송 같은 게 되슈
다 랍셔던 되기로 하대
테니 간도 송송탄다
Pernan dushi sengete dushi zangbo dushi ngenba yonggrowa chik tendo da yuena ten dushi mangpo de yong tam mendo ngen dushi set
dushi sangyen mangpo yö
yeah.
And then we go on to the third of the 5 skandhas, which has to do with acts of focusing in consequence of and knowledge of a focus in consequence of the synchronous meeting of causes and conditions favorable to that happening. And so here again you find both constructive focus and the opposite, as well as subcategories. So what is at hand is again a multitude of things, and a truly existent self, if it were to be real, if it were to exist, would be a single thing that is not subject to change. So if one puts that in relation to a multitude of things in connection with any of the skandhas, that involves many types of something specific, it would prove impossible to locate something so opposite to all those things in nature within those things.
대간나 신게 두시다 따용도 양
두시레 양
두시
다 두치
야 pen gave semjong me gave semjong yongyorwa.
Then we have the next skandha, which is primarily about various kinds of so-called mental events.
Di tendo dat kabandu tena ta dani ek maria. 단다 공부 딱 수도 직발해.
And so the course of investigation would be much the same, and the result of it the same, namely that a truly existent self within that skandha isn't possible either.
내가 난신게 넘버십 passangende 게라 딱제 땅용데 넘버십한데 다 초축 남시들이.
Then we have various types of object-oriented knowledge, and in Theravada Buddhism there is a list of 6. And again, no, Tani?
다 초축 남시게 땅용데 penna nig number shepata da ina yinam da maim bachagro watene.
So you have the 5 sense perceptions and object-oriented knowledge in that regard, and then number 6, which primarily has to do with the intellect and its workings. Now, if we take one of them, in terms of trying to locate the truly existent self, for example, that of cognizing a visual object, the sense perception of, or the visual perception of a visual object. Now, if someone finds that the self is located within this specific mental working, this type of perception, again the same result would happen, namely then that all the other 5 types of perception become redundant, because the self would have nothing to do with these perceptions, and therefore who could then hear, taste, and so on, if it's the case that the self or the self's location is within visual sense perception.
다 근데 신직 제용돼 다음에 바로 타쳐.
So, in the course of detailed investigation,
즉 통용돼 단데 즉 봉샤르마도 탐면도 선별로데 레기어 딱 원나 봤어.
So, the practitioner here has by now arrived at a very keen understanding of the fact that whatever is experienced within various worldly existences is nothing but suffering.
대인도 konna betene
Dungal.
tammebachi yoba.
Worldly existences are about endless suffering.
Tene tak kolwada dungayin bangi sar kowanda punggodu tak dame badala tsechi du sama tangsha nga singe kongsaga dame bitsuitala.
And the practitioner therefore turns his focus to no self.
Di yinto ta nyinto ge lam na shu yongdo nyinto ge lam singe di nang na shu yongdo ta de nyinto be tekbe nang na shu de be kongsa tenzo ki yin semje na samna metang wa da mare de ta tungko dele chik chwe ma tum na tammendo tembe lo de leba ta kona.
And the idea is that one has to escape the samsaric mindset. There is no other method for going beyond rebirth in worldly existences. However, this doesn't mean that these practitioners disregard the welfare of others. It simply means that they choose to make realization of no self their main purpose.
Tintu kong be kongsa ke dam ni be den de tok pe che to tingen sing la zhen de samba de yo.
Kangi sampa?
Tingen sing la zhen gui. Sama de yo tu pe shu tra po yo tu. Ta chim le den na chim ge sha wa tang chim ge yin wa ge den de yong tu ye me ba de zigi.
Kim Pangyor. And therefore, the majority of practitioners here, or serious practitioners here, choose to give up a worldly way of life. They give up the life of a householder, in that they see that preoccupations with family, its members, and so on, within a household type of lifestyle, will prevent them from maintaining a one-pointed focus as to realizing no self.
Chimte mapuna pena tingen zema tsechi tu söte togyo.
If one doesn't give up a householder way of life, there is simply not time for the efforts needed in order to attain a realization of no self.
Tene ta te chimpungwa ma se tene se yang sunyam panzegyo.
They also choose to beg for food, in that preoccupation with making money in order to be able to buy food would take away in their minds too much of the precious time they have in terms of focusing on efforts by way of which they can attain a realization of no self.
Goyang shagdar trepa singet chegyo. Goyang shagdar trepa sede karsana migi pejo tang savek. Second hand tulot.
In terms of clothing, their monastic garb, as it were, is made from the fabrics of used clothing. So again, they do not need to spend time to make the money necessary to buy clothing either. They can devote all their time to the efforts by way of which a realization of no self can be attained.
Dusögün jowala tene sisöji ni gelong getsong denzo yusa kongban rabu te yore mato ngamale nge dagdo songwe kongmi yang mebse.
Now, nowadays you have monastic institutions and the like, and therefore members of monastic communities have a small dwelling, a small private dwelling, as it were. Now, in the early days of Buddhism, that was not the norm. In the early days of Buddhism, they lived without a fixed dwelling.
Perna gendan pasingetela tebe goruship gendan batela shawa zo shawa ni mato mevre shawa sum mato mevre.
Members of monastic communities engage primarily in just two activities.
Lokpa tösam jikolos.
The first is the focus on reciting the Buddhist scriptures and the focus of receiving instructions and explanations of the Buddhist teachings and then contemplating these.
Tene pongwa something kolos.
Pongwa something kolos kange pongsongre.
Konsak da to tawe nam to nyomong pongwe che tu den ta to tingen zem negi.
The next or the second of the two involves fostering a mindset of various stable meditation states with the purpose of realizing no self.
Laso tatrin tema to tusamare ngam gonagdu. Tin de talat sam jegi.
So that's all for today. Khenpo says he's sorry, it's a bit shorter today, but unfortunately he has quite a bit of a headache, and therefore he'll end today's session here. Here in Vienna, for quite some time now, the weather shifts very suddenly from warm to cool, and there are showers of rain in between, so there is a lot of fluctuations as to the temperature, and that has this effect, Khenpo Rinpoche explains, on him of producing headaches.
Sunam de ye tamje zikpa ye tabne yebe danam pamche chegana je balav chubwa ye sikbe tsolen rowa rowa sho.